It is stage number 16 at the season's final Grand Tour. One of the shorter stages of the entire race, and here is the general classification coming in. Really a two-man race between Vincenzo Nibali and Chris Horner. And for more on this one-on-one battle, let's go to Todd Gagulski. A gorgeous day in the Central Pyrenees of northern Spain, and 3 categorized climbs for the riders on this 16th day of the race.
Steve, they started out earlier today, already went over the Category 3, the long trending uphill to the Category 2, and the final climb which awaits them is the Category 1 for Miguel. It's 10 miles in length, has about a 2,000-foot vertical rise, 9.5% maximum, but it's not super steep overall, so it's going to be tough for Chris to get rid of Vincenzo on a day like today.
And we are now live looking down on the main field on a sunny, warm day in northern Spain. Quite a relief from the cold and wet weather over the course of this past weekend. And, well, these are the items at stake in today's stage 16. And I think among the items that you're taking a look at right there, the GC contenders riding towards a rest day. How much will they really want to ride today after 2 very hard days riding in the mountains on Saturday and Sunday, knowing that that rest day is coming up tomorrow?
Well, and that's a critical thing, Steve. When you got a rest day, you can ride just as flat out because you got the next day to recover. So basically what you're going to see with the GC men is if they see an opportunity to take time over Vincenzo Nibali, they're going to go for it. But today's course is not super well suited in a pure power standpoint. It's going to be a tactical event if it happens.
We have a 9-man breakaway that took quite a while to form up the road. The highest placed rider on the general classification is Chris Anker Sorensen, the Dane for the Saxo Tinkoff team. He is over 20 minutes down, so no threats as you would expect in that group. The red line at the bottom of the screen showing that they are on the second of the 3 climbs, the Category 2 right now. And the peloton just a minute and a half behind, but everyone really flying today. It's been a very high pace from the outset.
Everybody wanting to make the breakaway because really today looks like it has a reasonable chance of a breakaway staying away. The problem for the breakaway is it took so long to get away, they never actually got much of a time gap established. And as you can see, it's not looking so good for the breakaway right now.
Yeah, we just saw a moment ago that the gap was a minute and a half, but that's a lot less than 90 seconds with the Astana-led main field coming up from behind. Vincenzo Nibali in the red jersey. He's got 5 teammates in front of him, 1 behind, and then behind him is Chris Horner in the white jersey. He's leading the combined classification here right now at the Vuelta and sitting second in the general classification, the only man within a minute of Nibali. Well, we start this final week at the season's final Grand Tour, really a 2-man race between Nibali and Horner. So you have to look at the upcoming stages and think, all right, where might the battle really be fought? Where can Horner take back time on Nibali? Where will the tactical games really play out in the remaining stages in this final week?
And Steve, you have to look at the penultimate day on the Angleroo, which is a massive mountain and super steep, over 20%. That's a natural place. And then the Peña Cabarga as well, stage number 18, is another very steep climb to the finish line, but it's fairly short. Outside of that, you just look at things that could crop up, crosswinds, interesting tactical battles. And when I talked with Chris after the race last night, actually it was almost midnight that he actually was just finishing up dinner, and we chatted a little bit, and he said, you know, Nibali's legs are every bit as good as his, and he either needs Nibali to have a bad day or he needs to catch Nibali in a crosswind or something like that where the field splits in half. But he said he could also fall victim to either one of those 2 things. So these guys are very evenly matched at the top.
Well, it looks like we have a few different groups here out on the road, judging by the pictures we're now seeing from above. We have the peloton at the bottom picking up a group of riders just in front, and then that other group that is actually up ahead on the road. So it's not just a 9-man breakaway and then the main field. Judging by these live pictures, it looks like a couple of different groups are ahead of the peloton right now with just under 50 kilometers left to go on the stage.
Yeah, so a lot happening all of a sudden. You see two more guys right now going across from the Espana-led peloton to the group right in front. And in moments like this, it's relatively easy for Vincenzo Nibali and his Astana teammates to watch guys as they go across. This is Barguil, the stage winner from a couple of days ago, I do believe, from a breakaway, the very young 21-year-old on the Argos team. But they can keep a really close eye as guys trickle off the front in a situation like this. So they know who's up the road, and they know if they have to worry about it or not. Barguil also has Cardoso with them, the Cajo Rual rider, and they have now bridged across to that group.
And Barguil, one of 8 first-time Grand Tour stage winners in this year's Vuelta. Which may sound like a lot, but it's really not a surprise, because every year the Vuelta is an opportunity for some younger riders and riders who don't always get a shot in a Grand Tour to make their mark. And now we are back up with our leaders. Number 198 there in the dark with the blue trim. That is Rigoberto Urán, the Colombian for Team Sky. And Chris Anker Sorensen for Saxo Tinkoff in the blue, yellow, and black, riding in the middle of that group. As I mentioned before, the highest placed rider among the leaders in the general classification, but still over 20 minutes down. And going over the top of the Category 2 climb.
So a lot of possibilities here today. Urán, a very good man in the mountains. You have to think that he may have a shot at a stage win if that breakaway group can stay away from the field.
The actual summit at 46.8 kilometers remaining in the stage, and then they'll drop down, hit an intermediate sprint just over 30K from the finish, and then that final climb, the Formigal, is just over 15 kilometers in length going up to the summit finish of the stage. So just about the last 16K or so will be uphill here today. And a 44-second gap over the top of the second of the 3 climbs.
And the peloton right behind that other group, just over a dozen seconds or so separating them. So that second group struggling to get a little bit of an advantage over the peloton, and we'll see how the descent treats them. But the other guys have a little bit of an advantage, but you know, if it's under a minute at this point, it's going to be tough.
And these are the numbers that articulate the gaps and what the riders are facing. So no big time margins right now with 1 climb left to go. They've done the Category 3, the Cat 2, and now just the Cat 1 left to go at the finish. Still for everyone just going over the top of the Category 2. Now 1 climb left to go. Just about 16 kilometers in length. The Category 1 at the finish here on stage number 16. Second rest day coming up tomorrow. And then perhaps a rare sprinter stage on Wednesday. More climbing going towards the end of this final week, and then of course the traditional final stage in the Spanish capital of Madrid that will no doubt end in a sprint next Sunday. Our leaders just over 40 kilometers now from the finish. And a lot of riders, given the hard riding, the series of mountains, the tough weather, have already pulled out of this race. Almost 50. We have 4 teams that have lost 5 riders apiece. That is over half the riders on a given team, because everybody starts with 9 when a Grand Tour begins. And it's basically the equivalent of 5 teams altogether. 48 riders at the start of the day had pulled out. So you're looking at basically 5 teams worth of riders abandoning this race with still a week left to go. That's an illustration, and a perfect one, of just how hard this race has been.
And Steve, it's not just been all the mountains, but certainly that's been a big component of it. But it's also been some of the nasty weather they had over the weekend, especially on Saturday's stage number 14. That particular day was brutally cold. It was really long, and they were also descending in those cold temperatures in the rain, and it just freezes you on the bike. Barguil here really putting the pressure on that chasing group that's trying to make it up to the lead group of 9. He's already tasted victory in this Vuelta, and I think it was pretty sweet for him. He wants a little bit more.
As I pointed out, one of 8 first-time Grand Tour stage winners that we have had at the Vuelta so far this year. Now, when you see riders pull out of a race like this, it's always interesting, because when you look at other sports, athletes don't always have those options. If a football player wants to quit a game in the second quarter, his coach is going to say, no, you get back in there and you play. Same with basketball, hockey, baseball. But in cycling, it seems like the athletes themselves have more control and more power over the situation. Why is that?
That's a tough one to answer why that is, but I guess it's really because the rider knows about how bad their body feels and how much they're suffering. And I think with a coach in a typical team sport, they can see the guy out there and they can see that he's floundering. They can see that he's not making his passes, he's not hitting his shots, he's not making it happen. But in a bike race, if you're just empty, you're empty. Now, there are some exceptions to those particular moments, and there used to be a race before the wall came down in the Eastern Bloc. It went through East Germany, Poland, and Czechoslovakia, called the Peace Race, and it's come back, but it's not as big a race on the calendar anymore. And a couple of years before I raced that race, Steve, one of the Russian guys was in the gutter in a crosswind and ran into one of these guardrails and broke, it was his foot or his lower leg or something. His coaches, because they weren't sure, put him back on his bike and said, you're only 10K from the finish line. You got to finish because we need you tomorrow, and we want to make sure before we let you quit today that you're not able to. So he rode 6 miles basically with a broken bone in his lower leg. And
what a shock the Russians would take a hardline stance like that.
Well, and the thing is, Steve, that was the race before the wall came down. Those guys weren't racing in the rest of Europe, so that was their Tour de France, and it meant everything to that Russian coach, and the rider had to suffer through it. And they said, oh yeah, look at that, you got a broken leg, I guess you don't have to ride tomorrow.
Just under 40 kilometers now left to go on stage 16 today. And if you have questions for Gogo, you can tweet them here throughout the Vuelta telecast. And the most recent one coming in wants to know, Paul that is, how long do most professionals try to keep in the big ring when climbing?
Well, Paul, that's pretty easy. Just long enough to stay with Steve Schlanger, and he's putting the hammer down on one of those big climbs.
And I'm just drilling it, you mean? Yeah.
When you're putting everybody in the hurt locker. But in all reality, what I think is the most efficient for most guys at the professional level that have a lot of efficiency and higher leg speeds is to be in the easiest gear you can be in while maintaining contact with the guys that matter. So when I was racing, and still when I go out and ride with a lot of guys, if I'm on a big mountain, I want to be spinning up the climb, and if Schlanger's up there on the front just drilling it, well, if I can be spinning an easier gear, I'll get out of my big chain ring. But if I need to stay in that bigger gear to stay with them, then I will. And that tends to be my approach to climbs, and that's what I tell young riders when they're getting into the sport of bike racing.
Because you know I'm in the big ring going over Alpe d'Huez, Mont Ventoux. I am not backing down.
Yeah, that's pretty much the way you roll, Schlanger.
All right, so for more Twitter questions, you can do it at BGGogo, hashtag La Vuelta in this final week of the Vuelta a Espana. Everyone on the descent of the Category 2 climb headed towards the final climb. This was just moments ago. Watch out along the guardrail.
Well, Gregory Ross looking back for his team car, but up in front, the Lampre rider stopping on the side of the road, and pow! Luckily, it was a low-speed crash, but Ross was critical 2 days ago in the wet when Chris Horner actually got split off on a descent, and Ross went to the front for like 5 miles and just closed down the gap for Chris. And Chris was really very happy about that. He was telling me that last night as well.
Riders coming through the town of Gavin with just about 36 kilometers left to go. They are 4K away from the second of the 2 intermediate sprints on today's stage.
Well, this is the 2 front groups coming together. The man right at the back of the group in front of the motorcycle up there is Warren Barguil, who went across from the second group. He was absolutely bombing this descent, and the other 3 men here getting across as well.
A lot of these riders know that the general classification teams are more than likely going to let them go. There's not going to be a big battle behind them for the stage win, given everything that's happened. So they're all sensing an opportunity to win a stage.
You ever wonder how you get these great images? Well, it's the man on the back of the motorcycle standing up with the camera. They do that on the descents as well sometimes, but sometimes they're going so fast downhill they have to sit down for the center of gravity on the motorcycle.
Can't imagine there's a more difficult sport to cover for television than professional cycling at this level.
It is quite tricky, there's no doubt. There's so much going on out there on the roads, and all the organization that it takes to close down these towns and keep people and cars and people with their dogs and everybody out of the way. And sometimes it doesn't go right. Sometimes somebody's dog does get off the leash or out of their yard and into the bunch, and it can cause big crashes.
Now riders still off the front, in pursuit, giving chase. A lot of activity off the front of the peloton with the 2 groups, and especially the breakaway of 9 riders that's been at the front. But everybody wants to make it to the front, catch the riders who are at the very head of the stage right now, and put themselves in position to go for a stage win as these riders hit that intermediate sprint point I just mentioned a moment ago.
Steve, there are a lot of possibilities. Gusev, the Katusha rider, Sorensen, and the other Sorensen on the Saxo team. That's Nicky Sorensen going across. Today is one of those days where a lot of guys really thought there was a chance if they made the break that they would stay away, because the finishing climb, though it's long, is not super steep, and maybe the general classification guys will just be eyeing each other and not ramp it up fast enough to catch the breakaway.
Well, it's a very interesting dynamic right now because you have a lot of riders here in this move that is up the road. They just don't have a lot of time, and when you have a long climb at the finish, you're going to have that natural process of attrition that's going to bring a lot of these riders back and carry a lot of the general classification riders forward. So it's really hard to predict what's going to happen. Are some of these riders going to launch an attack and maybe 3 or 4 go up the road together? There's just a lot of possibilities now for the way the remainder of the stage could unfold.
Yeah, and that group looks like it's about 20 guys at this point. So it is definitely one of those days where you roll the dice and just see how it plays out at the end of the day.
Back here at the front of the general classification group going through the intermediate sprint, 122 down, led by Astana.
So the lead group has picked up a little bit of time. They were down to only 37 seconds advantage over the peloton not long ago. If that keeps up for very long, if Astana is comfortable, the team in the blue, the team of the overall leader, Vincenzo Nibali, if they are happy with that break, it may succeed.
Riders scattered about right now in that peloton as they look up the long road ahead to see another big group now at the front of the stage. Margin now swelling to our leaders, going up close to 3 minutes with 26.5 kilometers remaining.
Amassed around him, and then it's all the Astana guys on the front. They are certainly content to let that breakaway go today.
Thinking about how Astana has all the riders still in this race, and of course Vincenzo Nibali is leading the overall race for Astana. Nibali was part of the Liquigas Cannondale team that had that incredible streak of so many Grand Tours in a row where they wouldn't lose a single rider. Every single guy was finishing every single Grand Tour.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible as we see so much attrition in these Grand Tours. And it makes sense. I mean, you got 3 weeks of racing over 23 calendar days. So there's always 2 rest days thrown in there. But guys, inevitably, they end up sick, they crash out, or they just get so depleted they can't go any further and they have to drop out of the race. And so it's not unheard of to see almost every team finish some riders down in every Grand Tour.
So Astana with most of their riders at the front of the field right now with 25.5 kilometers left to go. So just inside of 10K away from the start of the final climb.
About him already, winning stage 13 from a breakaway previously.
And each of the last 2 days we have had a first-time Grand Tour stage winner who was out front by himself for a long time, gaining a lot of time over anybody chasing from behind. Rato 2 days ago, Genier yesterday, had several minutes on everybody else, and coming from a breakaway but riding solo for the last hour or so of the race. But today a big group, and doesn't look like we're going to get that solo rider getting that substantial amount of time here today in the way we saw over the weekend.
This one certainly could come down to seconds at the finish line. And that group was kind of splitting up. It's kind of coming back together. Some guys along for the ride, just sitting on the back, playing the tactical game that way, thinking if they can save some energy now, then they'll be good later on. But there could be a split in front of them in the group, and then they may miss that split as one of the BMC men, it looks like, heading out of the front of that breakaway group.
Fabian Cancellara, number 181 at the back of the peloton. Been one of the top support riders for Chris Horner in the hills, and also won the time trial on stage 11 in dominating fashion.
Got to look for Cancellara at the Worlds as well to be a hugely marked man. I think in the road race he's going to be so marked it may ruin his chances, but he may be on some of the best road form of his career right now.
Euskaltel at the front of the field. Sammy Sanchez is their highest placed general classification rider. Yesterday moving up into the top 10. Currently sitting 9th at 7:46 behind Nibali. Sanchez looks like second wheel there from the front, so perhaps just trying to protect his spot, maybe even move up further in the general classification.
And they're one of those teams that has all 9 members remaining. The other one is Astana. And interestingly, they're the top 2 teams in the team general classification, which is the first 3 guys that cross your line, the finish line every day. Astana leads that by 3:53 over Euskaltel. I still, it's a little curious to me to see all the Euskaltel guys on the front right now. They're not going to bring back the breakaway. And I'm wondering if there's a Team GC play in. Maybe Movistar has a bunch of guys in this break, and they're the 3rd place team on Team GC, and maybe that's what they're riding for right now, is to try and keep that gap small.
Yeah, you never know. There's so many possibilities. It could be the Team GC. It could be just for Sanchez. It could be other guys just trying to move around in the general classification or race for a separate competition. You always look at points and King of the Mountains, the combination jersey. There's so many other subcategories beyond the overall general classification that teams have their eyes on, and on any given day they could be riding for that as opposed to just the overall. Well, our leaders with a margin of just over 3 minutes and just about to start that last climb. Officially, it begins at 15.8 kilometers remaining on the stage.
Well, it was good.
So if you do want to attack, that is a likely point late in the climb. With 15 kilometers left to go now, Barguil pulls off the front. This is a run for Team Sky now at the head of affairs.
Chiruka there for Caja Rural. And that is
Jose Herrera there from Movistar as well.
So there is at least one Movistar man up the road. No Euskaltel men up the road right now. Thinking about that Team GC issue potentially.
Now we have a rider accelerating here. is going to go to the front and stretch things out a little for the group.
Yeah, trying to make it up there. Dominique Nares in this front group is the BMC man in the red and black.
Looks like there's a good chance of this group coming back together the way things are developing here.
So that's Arata in the blue for Movistar, Bergil in the white for Argos. And we do have a Euskaltel rider up there as well. So now it makes absolutely no sense to me why the Euskaltel men are on the front of the peloton.
Could it still be the general classification?
I guess it's got to be.
In some fashion for Sammy Sanchez?
Yeah, they just got to be thinking maybe he can pop off late in the race today and pick up a handful of seconds and have an impact on the general classification. You talked about Sanchez coming in 7:46 down in 9th place, but it's Leopold Koenig in 8th at 6:18. That's almost a minute and a half in front of him in the GC. But you know, you pick up a little time here, a little there, and maybe by the end of this week he moves up into the top 5. Maybe that's what he's got his designs on.
And if Euskaltel is still thinking about the team classification, probably not a bad goal for them since they are disbanding in their current form at the end of the year. They have the Formula One driver Fernando Alonso coming in to take over the team, and yet to be seen how he'll change things or what they'll be referred to as going forward. But Euskaltel, the way we have known them over the years, is now going to be altered in somewhat. So maybe this would be a good way to go out in their final Grand Tour to win the team competition, as you see the critical numbers here on the final climb. So no one really getting away from the big group at the front. We've seen some accelerations, but nothing that's looked close to becoming permanent. 2K into the climb, back at the front of the field. Euskaltel in the orange and black still leading the way. We are just under 14 kilometers left to go on stage 16 of the Vuelta a Espana, presented by Earbuds here on Universal Sports. A big leading group has just under 3 minutes on the main field on one of the shorter stages in this year's race. This is the final of 3 consecutive stages in the Pyrenees in northern Spain. Steve Schlanger with Todd Gugulski. Gorgeous day, sunny and warm after cold and rainy weather this weekend. Forced a lot of riders to drop out. Maybe rethinking things now, judging by the scenery they are enjoying today on stage 16, just ahead of the race's second rest day coming up tomorrow. We had a few different groups on the road earlier in the race as the breakaway tried to get settled. Took a long time today, and finally 2 groups came together, formed a large group at the front, and now this is the head of the peloton, led by Euskaltel in the orange and black, just going inside of the 15K to go banner on the stage.
Up here in that large breakaway group, it's Juan Manuel Garate, the Spaniard on the Belkin squad, who's trying to mix things up a little bit. The Frenchman in the white, who just swung off of the chase, Warren Barguil, who won stage 13 from a breakaway earlier in this race. But you can see how many guys are back there trying to claw their way back up to the wheel of the few men in front of them.
Now the Belkin team is one of the 4 that I mentioned earlier that has lost 5 riders throughout this race. They lost Theo Boss, Graham Brown, Steph Clement, Luis Leon Sanchez, and Laurent Tandam along the way. So they've lost over half the riders they started with. So trying to salvage something in Juan Manuel Garate now at the front of the stage with just about a dozen kilometers left to go uphill to the finish.
And Steve, of course, this large group of riders has nobody who's a threat in the general classification battle of this Vuelta. So they are content to fight it out for the stage win, as Mikel Charel, the 3rd man up here, and he is number 15 on the left, just getting back on the wheel of Garate. This breakaway group with no threat from the GC has a very good chance of succeeding for the stage win.
Barguil, Charel, and Garate. Garate at the front in the green and dark colors for Belkin. If I'm not mistaken, wasn't Juan Manuel Garate the rider who on Saturday during the cold and rain got into the team car and warmed up for a little while before continuing in the race?
I actually think it was him, as he just put the heater on full blast and said, look, I have two options. I can lose 10 minutes sitting in the car, or I can quit the race. Well, let me think about that for about 10 minutes. Okay, I guess I'll get back on my bike.
So during the way he's riding today, maybe that little lunch break in the team car to warm up was a smart move. Inside of 11K now to the finish of stage 16.
That's what's so critical about these bike racers, is that they never give up, because yeah, there are only a few guys in the hunt for the general classification, but anybody could pick up a stage win from a breakaway on a day like today. And so if you feel horrible one day, you just can't drop out, and you may still get another chance.
And not as shocking as you may think, because considering what Belkin had been through, again, losing 5 riders already, so they weren't going to do much in the race. There was nobody left for the general classification, nobody left for the sprints. So maybe just winning a stage in the final week was the only goal they had left. So Garate says, hey, I can lose time in the general classification, no big deal. I'll take care of my body now and be fresh later.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the name of the game. You got to get whatever you can get out of these races, and you just fight to the next day, and you say, let's see if I can get in the break. And the entire team gets taxed, or I should say tasked, with making the breakaway, and they all follow the attacks, and they all go on the attack, and eventually one of those moves sticks. And if you got your guy in there, well, that's the first part of your job accomplished.
10 kilometers left to go. Euskaltel at the front of the main field. They have it lined up and are forcing the pace.
Yeah, you can see Chris Horner. Well, we just lost him there, but he's about 9-10 guys back, and he's just right behind that strung out single file pace being led by Euskaltel.
This is back to the large leading group at the front.
So the youthful exuberance of Warren Barguil after winning a stage from a breakaway back a few days ago, stage number 13. I wonder if he's going to do too much work in that breakaway group. He looks like he has great legs, but he may blow himself up in the process of trying to get away from everybody else and thin it down.
And the rider from Cofidis coming back from the breakaway. Well, the way that Euskaltel has been riding now for the last several kilometers, at first it looked like maybe it was for the team competition, or maybe just a GC placing for somebody like Sammy Sanchez. But the way they've been riding, you almost have to think that they're trying to bring everything back so they can get a stage win.
It does seem that way to me, as they're going huge right now. So 2:39 at the 11K to go banner. So that's just under 7 miles from the finish of the bike race.
It's still a big group to try and bring back here.
Well, the youthful exuberance continues, and this time with nobody on his wheel, this is what he needs. Sitting on the front, pulling the other guys that don't want to work with him is probably not going to net him a stage win. But this type of a move, this guy can go uphill.
Barguil making his move right here. Turned around, said, you know what? This is not a good deal. All you guys sitting on my wheel, so I'll see you later. Catch me if you can.
Yeah, and if they look around at each other in that giant group and everybody says, no, I'm not going to chase, you chase. No, I'm not going to chase, you chase. Well, the man who won the Tour de l'Avenir last year, he also won the mountains and the points classification, and that's the race for the young guys, also known as the race of the future. He could pick up his second stage win in this year's Vuelta at only 21 years of age.
Now, among that large leading group, he was riding at the front longer than anybody else. It wasn't one of those big groups we typically see where everybody takes even pulls at the front. They all work in concert with one another. Barguil was left to do so much of that pacemaking, so this is a smart move to take off and see what he can do on his own. All right, so they went through that flat and downhill section early in the climb, now starting to go steadily uphill.
What's incredible about this guy is he's a first-year professional, Steve. To get the win in stage 13, he was ecstatic. He was overcome with joy. Now he's got that confidence from that, and he's gone on the attack again from that breakaway group. And now he can start to try and think about it and think, I've already done this once. Can I do this again? He will be absolutely beside himself if he can win a second stage.
And now Espana has put a man back on the front ahead of Euskaltel. They are 246 behind Barguil at this point. Climb, but back here in the general classification with the rest day on tap tomorrow, does it make it worthwhile to even try something today, or do you just save it for the big climbs coming up later this week?
Well, have a look at the speed of the peloton, and it is actually on right now in the peloton. The peloton is blowing apart, so definitely, if you have a shot, go for it. Nibali sitting third wheel in the red jersey, overall leader. Valverde fourth wheel in the green as the points leader. Right behind Valverde in the white jersey, Chris Horner out of the saddle right now. They all have to keep looking at each other, because if you get an opportunity, man, you have to take it.
Saw Katusha at the front of this group too. Their goal now is to try to move Joaquim Rodriguez onto the podium. He's fourth in the overall standings at 257 behind Nibali, but he's chasing Alejandro Valverde, who is third on the GC at 142 back.
Oh, this is white hot. I mean, these guys are absolutely storming, and it looks like Moreno now just pulling
Here goes
off
Valverde.
the front. Here he goes.
Alejandro Valverde launching the move. Nibali looks at Horner.
Horner needs to just sit on Nibali. Horner has to not do any work here. He has to make Nibali do the work, put him into trouble.
Horner has a teammate in Kieserlowski, and Nibali also has a teammate for Astana there as well, as Valverde gets a small gap.
He's 1 minute 42 seconds down in third place, and it looks like he just sat up. I mean, that's it. He just pulled the plug.
Now, he may be trying to play a little defense for his podium spot right now. Again, sitting in third with Rodriguez behind him in fourth, and Katusha was setting a pretty good tempo ahead of him a moment ago.
And I think that Valverde, he looked back, he realized he wasn't getting much of an advantage. It's a headwind, and he said, maybe this isn't going to work. And he just pulled the plug on his own. I don't think his director would have told him to sit up at that point, because the director can't feel his legs, right?
And it's not like he's going to win the stage. They're not going to catch Barguil from this point.
Remember, everybody has the rest day to look forward to tomorrow, so it's a good day to go for shots, and that looks like Nicholas Roche taking another shot just like yesterday.
Roche trying to move up into the top five, currently sixth on the general classification, 349 down, but he's just 6 seconds from a top five spot.
And they immediately neutralized him with Katusha, and it looks like Rodriguez on the second wheel now. Rodriguez opens it up.
Perito was attacking yesterday, didn't go anywhere. Now Chris Horner just ahead of Nibali, putting in a little bit of an acceleration, and he's got a small gap on Nibali.
Well, Rodriguez loves to accelerate in a very punchy fashion. Horner, a little separation, and there's no Nibali with Horner. Horner needs to just throttle it.
But he's looking around. He's looking around at 2K.
Now he's going. Now Horner's starting to pick it up, but it's Nibali closing it down in the red jersey.
Yeah, here comes Vincenzo Nibali now, working his way back to Chris Horner with Valverde on Nibali's wheel. As we swing back to the very front of the race, haven't seen this guy in the last several minutes.
He just blew up, and Barguil just blew up, but Horner now continuing to keep it going here.
And he's still got the gap on Nibali. There's Aran. Rigoberto Aran passing Warren Barguil as they hit the 1K to go mark.
Aran could salvage something for the Sky team here. Aran, with a lot more experience than Barguil in the professional ranks, realized that Barguil is a first-year pro.
At a thoroughbred pace, it seems like, in the final half mile of the race. Side by side. And then behind them, Perito Rodriguez with his teammate, Vladimir Gusev. So Rodriguez sitting right behind Gusev, and they have a gap on the other general classification riders led by Horner here. Where's Nibali?
Oh, this is huge right now as Horner has that gap. He needs 50 seconds to move back into the overall lead. Not much time to do it today, but he might be getting some of it.
So much for a nondescript day before a rest day. This is Nibali losing time to Horner, sitting behind Valverde.
And Thibaut Pinot there, and then it's Valverde, then it's now in the orange is Sammy Sanchez. Nibali in
There
trouble.
goes Valverde. Valverde launches a move.
You gotta go when you have the race leader in trouble.
It looks like Pareto Rodriguez here. Now it looks like the time bonuses will be eaten up ahead of these riders on the road. Chris Horner in the middle of the screen in the white, behind Rodriguez, who was at the bottom of the screen. This is the race leader, Vincenzo Nibali. He is losing time. These are our two leaders on the stage. Iran in the dark colors, Barguil in the white, coming up to the finish, waiting to see who's going to get the stage win between these two.
And Barguil refusing to pull. He says, nope, you're in the front.
Oh, look
and
at
here
this.
comes Nares right on the wheel with Huzarski. Huzarski's got a good finish as well. Don't count him out.
Iran looks over his shoulder just the way he did in the Olympic road race in London last year. It cost him a gold medal. Now he's trying to preserve a stage win here at the Vuelta. Looks like it could be a four-man race for the victory today with 200 meters to go.
And Iran starting to ramp it up, but here comes Huzarski. Beware, gentlemen.
Iran not in the position he wants. Barguil right behind him. Then Huzarski. Nares losing the gap. He can't hold on. Now Iran sprinting for the stage win. Just ahead of Barguil. Is he going to hold on? Barguil came up, and I think Barguil pulls off his second stage win just ahead of Iran.
Barguil at only 21 years of age, showing the poise of a seasoned veteran, not taking a pole and getting the win. But here is Horner right back here.
He is a little ways behind this man, Joaquim Rodriguez. Again, Joaquim Rodriguez looking to move up into the top three, currently fourth in the general classification.
This is a big battle, and look at Nibali, all kinds of guys up the road from the race leader.
That's Leopold Koenig coming up behind him. Now, other riders crossing over here, part of the early breakaway. Here's Pareto Rodriguez.
And Rodriguez needs a bit of time to move up onto the podium. He's 257 down. Valverde is 142 down.
But he does have a gap on Valverde, who's behind him on the road. But this is the big story here. Vincenzo Nibali, the race leader, starting the day 50 seconds ahead of Chris Horner, who's in the white jersey here. But Horner has a big gap on Nibali. He's got Valverde right behind him, and then Thibaut Pinot in the blue.
So it is true that Valverde made it across from the Nibali group up to the Horner-led group. And now he's just sitting on the wheel, and he's probably going to jump Chris, but Chris needs to bury the throttle to get back as much time as he possibly can on Vincenzo Nibali.
All right, here's Nibali at 300 meters to go with Igor Anton in the orange and black for Euskaltel. Let's see where the Horner-Valverde group is. Here's Rodriguez coming across the finish line. There's Valverde, who pulled ahead of Pinot and Horner. Chris Horner crosses the line at 1:46 behind the stage winner. Now let's see where Nibali comes across. He's got 100 meters left to the line.
It's a nice little chunk that he picked up, no doubt.
Already 15 seconds that Horner has taken back. Over 20 seconds, Horner has pulled back on Nibali. 22 seconds officially. Horner takes back on the race leader Vincenzo Nibali with the summit finish on stage 16 at the Vuelta. We come back to our coverage of stage 16 at the Vuelta a Espana. And here is the new general classification. Chris Horner now within half a minute of Vincenzo Nibali at the top of the standings. Also some movement behind them with Alejandro Valverde and Joaquim Rodriguez on the move there late in the stage. And Rodriguez actually picks up a few seconds on Valverde as they race for that final podium spot. Valverde, the first to accelerate from the group of GC riders on the last climb.
This really got things ramped up as Valverde sat up, but then he went again, and all the men started to crumble up the road. Also was Joaquim Rodriguez, who had attacked after Valverde went, and it was when Chris Horner went after him that that gap really opened up.
So this is where Nibali, for a moment, looked like he was going to bring it back on Horner. But then Horner opened up a larger margin.
Horner just stayed out of the saddle and just kept drilling it as Rodriguez came across. Then Valverde, who had gotten up to the Chris Horner group and jumped him at the end. But the clock stopped there for Horner, and it was a long time before Nibali got to the finish line.
It would be 22 seconds overall between Horner and Nibali at the finish today, reducing his deficit from 50 seconds to 28. Well, here we go. The final 5 days of the season's final Grand Tour, and here is where we stand. Vincenzo Nibali is still the leader by now. Just under half a minute is his margin over the American Chris Horner at 28 seconds. So much developed a couple of days ago. For more, let's go to GoGo Cycle Center, outfitted by Adrenaline. 29 kilometers to Burgos with 2 Category 3 climbs there in the second half of the race.
And it is about 117 miles today. There's that little bump inside the final 10K, but when you only have a 2-man break, it certainly looks like a day for the sprinters.
And that 2-man break is on the left-hand side of the screen, now full screen. As we pick up the live action with just under 80 kilometers left to go, they have a lead of 4 minutes, which is just under half of their largest margin, which was over 8 minutes earlier in the stage. The Aussie Adam Hansen is the rider right here for Lotto Belisol, and Javier Aramendia in the green and white just behind him is the Spaniard for the Caja Rural team. 2-man breakaway that the general classification riders were content to let go. They are well down in the general classification. Hansen here almost 2 hours back of our leader Vincenzo Nibali.
Very tough for 2 guys. Javier Aramendia, you're seeing 3 hours, 16 minutes down on the general classification, but he's featured in multiple breaks. But on a day like this that everybody thinks the sprinters really want to take advantage of an opportunity, it's so hard if you only have a 2-man break for them to stay away. But it's always time to eat.
A little pizza pocket or something that he shoves in the mouth as we take you through what is at stake here in this stage number 17. You have the 2 Category 3 climbs, and you have the notion of a sprint stage versus a breakaway, potentially stealing the opportunity from the sprinters. Now, Lampre is the team riding at the front of the main field. They're the team in the pink and blue, also the team of sprinter Max Marchese, who has already proven himself to be one of the fastest sprinters in the field so far.
Yeah, a couple of second-place finishes in the race, and he continues to, well, let's just say hold out hopes. If you're a sprinter, you have to believe in your ability. And, of course, his team has to believe in that ability as well.
The most recent inquiry coming from Sandra, asking GoGo if the ride into Madrid on the final day is like the tour into Paris on the Champs-Élysées. Is it just ceremony for the general classification? I could even answer that one.
Would you want to answer it?
I would say absolutely. It's the same thing.
I'm going to take a slightly different take, and you can see right now, I just want to point out this crosswind has made a little bit of a difference here over the top of that climb, but it's somewhat similar to the Tour, but I think they get down to racing a little bit earlier in the Vuelta than they do in the Tour, whereas the Tour is ceremonial for a greater part of the stage. But yes, it's a flat day, so the guys know that they can't make any general classification differences, but they have the next 3 days with summit finishes to get all the business done.
Well, something to consider in this year's Vuelta is the fact that the top 2, Nibali and Horner, are separated by under half a minute. So if that gap gets even closer, we may actually see some racing on the final day. It typically doesn't happen just because the time gaps are significant enough that guys just use it as that coronation type of a stage, and it's essentially a parade. But if the time gaps are small, you do see some racing.
Yeah, and there's no reason that you wouldn't. There are also 2 intermediate sprints on the final day, Steve, and they have a few seconds attached to each one of those. So if it's within an intermediate sprint or 2, then you're really going to see some action. But we're seeing some action here right now because of the crosswind. And this is what the general classification men needed to be worried about. You saw the green jersey of Valverde there, but you need to keep a close eye out and see if Horner and Nibali are also in that front split.
And to ask Gogo a question throughout the Vuelta a Espana, just go to Twitter. It's @BeachyGogo, #La Vuelta. So Lapre at the front, Orica Green Edge there, and then Movistar. These groups now that were split on the road by a few seconds, it looks like are coming back together. But this was the most dangerous aspect of this stage. The winds coming from various directions, headwind, crosswind, tailwind should be coming up later on, but something you always have to keep a watchful eye for. And now on the left-hand side of the road, almost single file here at the back because of those winds. Looks like a sprinter stage on paper, but you have a couple of climbs, you have some undulations late, you have wind, you never know what might happen, and we've seen more than one textbook sprinter stage develop into something entirely different throughout this race.
And that was Simons, who just got brought back, who was off the front and was third over the last mountain, but we still up to our 2 men off the front. So now that means the next climb of the day, the guy who's third across can get some points, and we may see another battle between Rato and Ade for that final point.
Barguil, the young Frenchman of the Argos team, who won stage number 17 in dramatic fashion, outsprinting Rigoberto Urán at the very end. He's won 2 stages in this Vuelta, his first 2 Grand Tour stage victories, and the young Frenchman, believe it or not, has as many wins as Spain does in their home Grand Tour. The only Spanish victories are Daniel Moreno's 2 stage wins. That's incredible.
It really is incredible. I mean, sometimes you can never predict what's going to happen in a bike race, and some days, well, they're somewhat predictable, but these Grand Tours, the way these tea leaves, as you like to refer to them, get played out, it can be really challenging to figure out how it's going to happen.
The wind's still blowing, not all that briskly at the moment for our 2 leaders on this Category 3 climb, as the gap for the first time since we've seen them has come down under 3 minutes. And just about 2.5 kilometers left to go uphill. Now, so many elements in play for the general classification. The experience of Nibali finishing off a Grand Tour, having had to fight for it all the way to the end. Chris Horner, just the experience of being a veteran bike racer, having the freshness of not forcing a peak earlier in the season the way Nibali did. And Horner just having that fitness right now in the big mountains that nobody else seems to have. There's other guys who are riding pretty well, but nobody is climbing as well as Chris Horner. So you have a lot of these components that are going to all be huge factors in the final 5 days of racing here. And it's just basically all going to come down to who has it when it matters most in the upper reaches of the decisive climbs. And we should see that tomorrow and on Saturday. All right, 2 leaders leading by just under 3 minutes, coming up towards the top of the Category 3 climb. Well, the 11th day overall for Vincenzo Nibali in the red jersey as the leader of the Vuelta. Now on stage number 17, trying to recover from the exertions of those 3 consecutive summit finishes in the Pyrenees, coming off the rest day yesterday where he slept in till almost noon. And now trying to recover for 2 more big mountain days coming up tomorrow and on Saturday, stage number 20. As they hit the 4-hour mark today on stage 17, 2-man breakaway, 2-minute lead, 38.5 kilometers left to go. But boy, what a battle it's been between Nibali and Horner. Each has worn the red jersey twice, lost it, gotten it back. You don't often see an overall race lead at a Grand Tour like that, going back and forth that much, especially early in a race. But Nibali has surrendered it, gotten it back, and now he's enjoyed the longest consecutive spell that he's had the entire race, and he's hoping to hang on all the way to Madrid.
It certainly has been a big battle, Steve. And, you know, one of the things that you often don't see is you don't see the guy who's in the overall lead having not won a stage. And that's the case with Nibali right now. His Astana team won the opening team time trial by a handful of seconds over Radio Shack and Chris Horner's team. But since then, Horner's taken a couple of stage wins, and each time it's put him in the jersey, but then he's gone on to lose it the very next day, whereas Nibali has just been consistently at the top of the standings on each individual stage, and that's been the key to being in the jersey at this point.
Lampre, the team in the pink and blue, riding at the front of the main field here to keep the breakaway in check. There's the King of the Mountains leader, Nicolas Ede, now at the back of the field after getting the third slot in terms of points available over the final categorized summit today. But Lampre at the front of this group, riding for sprinter Max Riqueze here today. And that second climb, Hansen, Armandia, and Ade were the first three over, the only three getting any points. The way it stands right now in the general classification, it's all coming down to what happened on the time trial in stage number 11. Chris Horner lost a minute and a half to Nibali there. Had he lost just about a minute, maybe a little less, he'd be in the red jersey right now.
There's no doubt. And it's one of those weird things that it's an intangible to calculate. When I was talking with Chris before the time trial, he told me, well, you know, he didn't really care if he lost the jersey as long as he was close, that he could get it back in the mountains because he was feeling so good. But when he came out of that time trial 50 seconds down, that was on the sort of the far end of where he thought he was going to be. He thought he would probably be 30 seconds to 60 seconds off the lead. And when I spoke with his director after that, he said, well, we wish that Chris had been 15 seconds out of the jersey, not 50. So, you know, you have to take what you can get there, and certainly they haven't had to defend, which keeps the guys fresher, but it's a lot of time to make up.
And we've discussed throughout this race how him being fresh and not having raced that much because the knee injury might help him long term, but that's also potentially where his biggest liability came in, not having the miles under his belt on the TT bike.
Yeah, he hadn't been on his time trial bike at all. And that was a question I made sure to ask him. And he just said, look, man, you know, I spent the whole summer going to different specialists trying to figure out what was wrong with my knee and how to get over it. And he couldn't ride his bike. So when he finally was able to get back on his bike, he did, you know, and I'm summarizing here, 2 weeks riding around my neighborhood, just getting used to riding again. 2 weeks of endurance riding, and one really long, hard week before the Tour of Utah. Then he took a few days off, raced Utah, won a stage, got second overall, and then he continued with a few hard days after taking 1 day off after Utah, went to Spain, took a few days off, started the race. So he felt like he would benefit more by just training on his road bike than really spending the focused time on the time trial bike. And in the end, there's no way to know, you know.
Which makes sense because your climbing comes around first, and that's been evidenced by how good Horner has been climbing at the Vuelta. But you compromise your time trialing when you're not on your TT bike as much, and in the end, that 1 day could be the difference in the red jersey for this race.
It certainly could. And no matter what happens in this race, if Chris Horner loses it, if he loses it by anything less than 50 seconds, everybody's going to say that was the deciding factor. And to a point, it's somewhat true. But if he loses the race by 28 seconds where he is now, let's say he gets the same time as Vincenzo on every one of the next stages, you still can't guarantee that the time trial was the exact deciding factor, but it was certainly a big part in it.
Because things could have gone a different way. Maybe Nibali then attacks more in the hills if he needs time earlier in the race. So you don't know how the dynamics would have played out if the time trial would have gone differently.
That's right. But there's no doubt that the time trial was a tough day for Chris. There he is, getting a little food in his system right now.
In the white jersey.
There he is, right there. And who does he have in front of him? A bunch of his Radio Shack teammates.
Our 2 leaders had a gap of over 8 minutes at one point and now down under 2 minutes. As we move back to Twitter for more questions. Go fielding him left and right here today. And Andrew asking if a breakaway crash within 3 kilometers of the finish happens and the peloton catches them, do they still get the time gap they had before the crash?
So if you got 3 guys that come in, let's say they all wipe out with 1K to go on some hairy corner and they get caught, well, then they don't get a gap, because the way the rule works is if you have a mechanical or a crash in the final 3K, you get the time of the group you were with when they finish. Well, if the whole breakaway crashes out, there's no group that finishes up ahead from that breakaway. And look at these crosswind battles here. Speaking of crashing, this is where things get really hairy.
A chance to split up the field, and look at all the groups forming now.
Okay,
as the gap to our 2 leaders comes down to just over a minute.
I could see Valverde right there in the green. I could see the red jersey right back there, his white helmet, and Horner was in there as well.
So our top 3 on the general classification are there. What could make these crosswinds interesting is what sprinters get dropped along the way if these battles rage on through the remainder of the stage, because we don't have all of the true sprinters still left in this race to begin with. Their teams don't have the full complement of 9 riders, so what could be a reduced field of sprinters may come apart even more here the rest of the way.
And these crosswinds, man, they take their toll so fast. Nicholas Aday in the King of the Mountains jersey. There's Horner, second wheel. And it's Cancellara right on the front. Cancellara is the man in these kind of conditions. In fact, Horner's saying he hopes there's crosswinds because he's got the TGV Express in the name of Fabian Cancellara to shepherd him around.
And for the top teams, like that of Astana, with the leader in the middle of the screen there, red jersey Vincenzo Nibali, this is about getting out front, making sure you don't get caught in those winds, get split out from the back, or get involved in any crashes that may occur as a result.
Yeah, big time. And you just saw there Horner just a moment ago. He was pushing Cancellara to get him back in front of him, as he wants to make sure that Cancellara does the work up there and keeps him out of the wind while he keeps himself ready to go.
Interesting to note that Fabian Cancellara, who has been the best support rider in the hills along with Robert Kieserlowski for Chris Horner, is apparently pulling out of the Vuelta after today.
Yeah, it's crazy. Joaquim Rodriguez right in the middle of your screen, 121, white helmet, white on his back. He's in there as well. It is very tough for a guy like Horner in a situation like this, Steve, not to be having Cancellara going all the way. Now Nibali at the front. Why is Nibali at the front? He has no teammates left, so he's got to just freelance it off of these other guys.
And this is a group that's a few seconds back here. Now it looks like 3 different groups, riders in between as well. The wind's doing damage as the riders anticipated they might. And the gap to our 2 leaders down under a minute for the first time. And they should be at the second intermediate sprint point pretty shortly here. 26 kilometers left to go. Haven't seen much of them recently because of what's happening back here with the field and the splits occurring. Wow, those are some big gaps that are starting to form and some big groups.
It does not take long to blow a field apart in a crosswind. And when you have some crosswinds like they have here and you get out in these agricultural lands, it is chaos. And you can see men right on the edge of the asphalt. So it's Cancellara, then it's Horner. Kieserlowski, their teammate, is a few wheels back. And I see a lot of mouths wide open just trying to get enough air in.
Well, I tell you what, in a situation like this, is there any rider you would rather have in front of you than Fabian Cancellara?
I would say no.
I mean, just perfect for Horner, who now comes to the front here.
Oh, here comes Kieserlowski to the front. He says, come on, guys, get on my wheel. Let's try and do some more damage.
And now Nibali has a teammate in front of him for Astana in the turquoise colors, just behind Horner. 25 kilometers left to go for our 2 leaders, so they've gone through the intermediate sprint point already. We are back here with the field that has split up because of the winds on this flat section.
And they just made a little bit of a turn to the right, so it means it's going to be slightly more of a cross headwind than it was. It'll make it easier for guys to get a draft. The more directly that wind is out of the side, the worse it is for guys trying to sit on.
Now back to our 2 riders in the breakaway, Hansen and Aramendia. But this group, it looks like, closing in quickly. Just about a half-minute back. Cancellara back to the front, just ahead of Horner in the white jersey. On the left-hand side of the road, Nibali in the red. Horner's got two teammates. Cancellara in front of him. Keselowski right behind him. Joaquim Rodriguez on the right-hand side of the group, just going through the sprint banner. And Katusha in the red and white. Multiple riders for them up there near the front of the group for Joaquim Rodriguez, who was fourth on the GC.
All these guys back here, including number 13, Carlos Betancourt, the Colombian, they are just hoping that the pace eases up and they can get back into the draft. Because if it keeps going like this, eventually more gaps open up. And that's why Cancellara and Keselowski are trying to drill it on the front of this front group. They're trying to further break it up. Now it's Katusha.
Joaquim Rodriguez attacking in the summit finish the other day on stage number 16, but still has not won a stage. Has looked a little below his best, and now fighting to just get on the podium here at the Vuelta this year. Comes in the day 2:29 behind Nibali. Valverde just ahead of him on the GC, 1:14 back of the Italian. Today's stage heading west for 189 kilometers. They've done 2 Category 3 climbs. Now both of the 2 intermediate sprints. And all that's left really to break up a field sprint is these crosswinds they're dealing with and a small unrated climb 10 kilometers from the finish that'll get up to 9%.
Well, I'll tell you right now, if the crosswinds persist, and yeah, we've got some regrouping here, but if the battles persist in the crosswind before that little hill, that 1 kilometer or so long hill, we will not have a field sprint. We'll have all sorts of guys splintered all over the place.
Oh, Pozzovivo, number 11 for AG2R. He's caught back here in this second group. 5th on the general classification. Just behind Rodriguez as the day started. And not a guy who's built for the windy conditions.
No, he certainly isn't. Matthew Boucher, the American, also back there, struggling a little bit for Radio Shack.
All right, now back at the front in the green jersey, that is Alejandro Valverde, and Saxo Tinkoff, the team in the blue and yellow, coming to the front.
Yeah, they're there for Roach because they say, hey, Pozzovivo's not here. Pozzovivo's in front of Roach in the GC. Let's drill it.
Chance for Nicholas Roach to get up into the top 5 once again. Former leader of this race. He won stage 2 as well. Nicholas Roach just needs 5 seconds in order to get back into the top 5.
He certainly has more than that right now, but there's a lot of racing still to go. And the question is, will that lead group keep the hammer down? I have a feeling they're going to.
Now Hansen and Armandia about to be brought back here because of this wind battle that has unfolded in the final 25 kilometers.
And groups spread out all over the road, but a couple of big groups as we're seeing different groups with at least 3 large groups on the roadway right now.
And the first large group about to pick up the day's signature breakaway. The handshake makes it official that it's over. They had a lead of over 8 minutes and 1 point, and now they will be gobbled up by the first group on the road.
Well, they better get ready to hold on to their handlebars because...
Hold on to that granola bar, too.
I'll tell you what, man, get that food in your system fast because the crosswind battle is fierce.
Get out of the way because they are coming, led by Saxo. Remember, Saxo Tinkoff was the team at the Tour de France on that one very windy stage that broke up the field. Alberto Contador gained about a minute on eventual Tour winner Chris Froome that day. And now here is Saxo Tinkoff at the front on a windy battle of stage 17 that's developed with 20 kilometers left. That's the first group that contains the top riders on the general classification. In fact, the top 4 are there with Nibali, Horner, Valverde, and Rodriguez. Also the man who sits number 6 on the GC, Nicholas Roach, as well. The man who's not there is the rider who's in 5th, Pozzovivo, the Italian for AG2R. He's caught in the next group on the road.
Well, Pozzovivo is a tiny guy, and he's not a fan of the crosswinds, that's for sure. And on a day like this, they're in the saddle for a long time. Remember, it's 117 miles, so they're over 100 miles into this bike race today. And you just start to get complacent. You start sitting further back, and when it splits, you can't respond.
Well, also something that's going to be intriguing here. What sprinters have remained in that front group?
I bet you a lot of them are out of it. Rigoberto Urán, 198, second man from the back. Second place a couple of days ago, but he's not going to be getting that today, that's for sure.
Will these brakes stay? Will they come back together? 19 kilometers left to find out.
It's blowing everybody over into the gutter, and they're getting further and further over trying to get that draft. But when sometimes on some of the long helicopter shots we see him using the entire road, and so only some of the guys are in the draft, but everybody on the right side of this group is in the wind, and they're kind of pegged on their throttle, but yet they can't get in because there's all these other guys fighting for a position. Now let's look at the field here. At the front of the field, there are a few guys that are all drafting off of each other. Once again, it's these line right here. They're drafting off of each other, Steve. But the guys on the left side over here, they're all out in the wind. And so they're fighting to try and get over to the side of the road where there's draft. And it's just this sort of argy-bargy, elbows, pushing and shoving. And then the road opens up, more guys move over and get in the draft, and you just keep doing that over and over again.
This is that front group. Nibali, Horner, Valverde, and Rodriguez, the top four in the general classification, are in that front group. The two most prominent names not in that front group on the general classification, Pozzovivo, who's 5th, and Thibaut Pinot of the FDJ team, who is 7th. They have some time to make up.
And Morkov on the front right now for the Saxo Tinkoff team. Remember, he won a stage earlier in the race. That would be stage number 6. So he's got a special jersey because he's a Danish road champion, but he's very much part of that Saxo Tinkoff team. And they want to try and move Nicholas Roach up today. And certainly the way things are going, that's looking very good.
And look at the visual gap back to the next group. Wow. It's getting bigger.
It's getting bigger. It looks like these two groups are going to come together.
Now, very interesting to see what sprinters are back here, which ones have stayed in that front group. Didn't have a lot of sprinters left in the race to begin with, but this could really change the complexity of how this stage 17 plays out from here.
And a guy like Morkov, who could win from this front group, he's on the front right now. He's not even thinking about winning the stage. He's riding for his teammate Nicholas Roach for the general classification. So he's doing these big turns on the front, even though he's a fast sprinter, because they have a bigger goal, which is to try and move Nicholas up in the general classification.
And I think I saw Tyler Farah in that front group for the Garmin Sharp team. Not positive, but it looked like he was up there. He's a sprinter that's kind of been forgotten about, even though he's had some high finishes, but has yet to win a stage here at the Vuelta this year. But if he is up there and some of the other sprinters have been dropped, don't forget about him as a potential stage winner if he can get over that final unrated climb with 10K to go.
Yeah, and Farah's a guy who was a little bit concerned about that climb, and he said, you know, today's day was tougher than it looked on the road book, the book that they have that shows all the profiles. And Matteo Bono here, looks like he's giving it up right now. So he trying to figure out which group he was off the back of there. He might have been off the back of the front group.
All right, so this is back to that very front group with 15 kilometers left to go. Saxo Tinkoff still at the front. They are trying to get Nicholas Roach back into the top 5 of the general classification. He is currently 6th, but just needs a few seconds at the finish to move back into a top 5 position.
And there's just not quite enough of a full-on crosswind to really shatter that group, Steve. It's too much of a cross headwind, So the groups are still relatively large, but Saxo Tinkoff continuing to try to break it up.
Noticed a lot of Lampre riders in that front group as well. Maybe their sprinter Max Marchese is still in that front group too. He would be one of the fastest guys in a sprint. When you think about the potential sprinters, if this somehow does come down to a pretty big field sprint, we mentioned Farah, we mentioned Max Marchese, Michael Matthews of Oric Green Edge, Akias Arndt of Argo Shimano, and Gianni Mearsman of Omega Pharma Quickstep. We just don't know how many of those names are in this front group right now with 14K to go.
And one guy who might be a real danger man today is the Sky rider, the Norwegian Edvald Boassenhagen, because he can get up a short hill very well, and he's good on harder types of sprints, and this is sort of turning into a harder type of sprint because of this crosswind battle that's been ensuing now for a little while. Now they're only a few K away from that climb, and it's the Garmin. No, it isn't. It's still the Saxo Tinkoff men on the front.
Nibali has 3 teammates with him. Chris Horner has a couple of teammates as well. He's in the white jersey there near the top, sitting right behind Alejandro Valverde in the green jersey.
So those 3 guys doing a great job of positioning themselves in advance of this battle up this little hill, which is very narrow. And now the way the road turned, we should get a better crosswind, or I should say a harder crosswind, a more direct crosswind, so we may see some more guys spit out the back of this group.
So that final unclassified climb, known as the Castle of Burgos climb, right around 10 kilometers from the finish. There's some cobblestones on it. It does hit 9% at one point, so that could really split things up even further after the wind has already done some damage there. And the Pinot Pozzovivo group now almost 50 seconds back. It doesn't look like they're going to regain contact at this point.
No, I would say they're definitely not going to regain contact. It is on in the front of the bike race. And now Movistar coming up to the front as well with Valverde in the green jersey as the leader of the points competition. So there are way too many guys in the front group that are motivated for that second group to catch back up at this point of the bike race. Steve, the descent is very tricky. It's skinny. It's pretty sketchy. Luca Paolini for Katusha also up there. He'll probably be working for Rodriguez, but he's also the type of guy that might try something late here.
This is the front of the bike race with just about 9 kilometers left to go on stage 17, an unclassified climb that lasts for 1 kilometer. They're on the climb right now. Vincenzo Nibali, the overall race leader, has a teammate for Astana at the front. Katusha with a few riders behind in the red and white, and then there's Alejandro Valverde in the green jersey. Boassenhagen is there in the dark colors with the light blue helmet for Team Sky. Nibali's on the left-hand side of the screen in the red. Chris Horner also not too far away in the white jersey, right alongside Nibali.
Oh, that was steep right there. Painful to watch, and you can see in some of the fallout here. Horner not a real big fan of these short, steep climbs, but he seems to have great positioning right now.
Just trying to stay near the front, stay out of trouble, stay in position, not lose valuable seconds at some point.
So Astana really putting the pressure on this climb. They just want to keep it fast enough that nobody attacks their race leader.
This is the back of the group. So they'll be coming up to the summit shortly as Lampre launches an attack. Chris Horner had just moved to the front of the group, and Diego Ulissi from the Lampre team, a guy who could hang on to win the stage if he gets a gap here.
Oh, Ulissi is a very good talent. Stage winner of the Giro d'Italia a couple of seasons ago, and that really put everybody on watch that the young Italian was a man to be reckoned with.
I've been talking about the Lampre team for sprinter Max Marchese, but another option, is Ulissi from distance, just like this, with 8.5 kilometers to go. But will he get enough of a margin over the top of the climb?
It's going to be very tough for one guy to make it, but the descent is favorable for a single rider as long as he's on his descending form. One of the challenges is you make this supreme effort to get away on the climb, then he plummets on the descent, and his heart rate and everything is so high that it's hard to relax and focus on the descent, and you really got to nail these corners.
8 kilometers left to go. He's gone over the summit of the uncategorized climb, now on this descent, which is technical and on some very narrow roads, and the field not too far behind. Well, Lampre certainly won't be leading the chase for Max Marchese with Ulissi up the road now. So let's see who's going to try and bring him back. With the different groups that have formed on the road because of the windy conditions earlier, you have compromised teams that don't have a large number of riders to come to the front and really control the margin and do the work to bring it back. So that could work certainly into Ulissi's favor right here.
Yeah, and you could just see how nasty the descent is as well. And in the peloton, or well, the first group from the peloton there, they're going to want to be just a little bit conservative on a descent like this. And remember that Ulissi has no impact on the general classification. He's way down in that classification. So for everybody back there, it's only the stage hunters that are going to be concerned about bringing him back, because he's an hour and 4 minutes down in the overall time.
Where it will really get difficult for him is the final 5 kilometers, because it's more or less straight and flat all the way to the finish. There's a couple technical turns, but especially once you get inside of 3K, it's almost dead straight and flat the rest of the way. So that's a long, straight, flat road that provides a difficult time for a single rider to stay away from a field.
Yeah, and to add insult to injury on that, Steve, it's predominantly headwind, and that's really tough on a single rider. But Ulissi here is giving it a go. Once you get out there, even though you only have a handful of seconds, as Cancellara leads the field, you want to keep going.
And it does look like Tyler Farrar was in that group right in the middle for Garmin Sharp. This is good for Lampre. They don't have to work to set up Marchese in a sprint because they have Ulissi out here. But if it does come back together, perhaps Marchese could be fresh and ready to go for whatever kind of reduced bunch sprint we might have. And now another rider off the front here, it looks like. An Euskaltel rider in the orange and black down below. A couple of riders as well at the 6K to go banner. So it looks like there's 3 riders ahead of this group, and then Ulissi at the very front. There's some other riders trying to get a gap. And one of Ulissi's teammates here. Well, this is actually Ulissi who is coming backwards.
So yeah, he has such a small advantage now, being joined by Martinez and other men driving on the front of the peloton. Now it's Cancellara getting surpassed by what looks to me like a Garmin Sharp man. It may be Johan van Sumeren, the winner of Paris-Roubaix a couple of years back. And he's got to be thinking Tyler Farrar has a really good shot at picking up a Grand Tour stage win. And boy, it's been a long drought for the American winning a race in Europe.
Red jersey of Nibali ahead of the green jersey of Valverde. Chris Horner moving up alongside Valverde. Now Nibali in the white. So the top 3 in the general classification, almost tip to tail there near the front of that group. 5 kilometers left to go. Now single file as the pace picks up once again here.
It looks like Horner opened up a little bit of a gap going through one of those corners. Maybe he just took it slightly easy because he felt it was pretty sketchy and he didn't want to crash. Now he's having to close it down, but he's closed it back down.
That's second guys in the top 10, now almost a minute back. Espana, the team of race leader Vincenzo Nibali, with a rider going up the curb now to the middle of the road, launching a move from the front. Again, from here on in, it's going to be difficult for any one rider to get away. No more climbing, not a lot of technical corners, mostly straight and flat into a headwind.
Yeah, they do have that one chicane. It's just a little bit inside 3K to go, where they make a left and a right, both about 90 degrees in fairly close succession. But I completely agree, Steve. The headwind and the open roads, that's what conspire against men like this who are trying to ride in solo.
.4K banner. That's Ulissi at the back of the group. Now the top general classification riders, top 4 as a matter of fact, Nibali, Horner, Valverde, and Rodriguez near the front of that first group. Nibali has this one teammate just off the front as we come up on the final 3.5K. What other sprinters are in this group and ready to duke it out? Saw Tyler Farah. We believe Max Ricchese is there for Lamprey as well. Edvald Boassenhagen of Team Sky, he is in there. So 3 very fast riders, certainly with a chance to pull off a stage win. Tyler Farah probably needs it the most. Hasn't won in a Grand Tour in over 2 years. Doesn't have a contract for next year. Desperately needs something good to happen to secure his place in the sport for 2014. Has won at the Vuelta before. Oh, he's just missed out on a few occasions.
The grind here on the front. I mean, you can just feel it in these guys' bodies. Everything telling you got to keep going, but they just bringing you back. The legs can't do it.
So inside of the final 3 kilometers. General classification riders still staying near the front, and now waiting to see who's going to take up the pacemaking.
Now let's also remember, if there's a crash or a mechanical now, as Horner's in second position, you get the time of the group you were with at the time of that mechanical incident. So if somebody has a problem in the general classification, they don't get a stage place, but they put him in this group as the last rider.
I think that's Horner up there, second wheel.
Yeah, it was him coming around the corner in second spot behind a Movistar or a
Saxo, it looks like.
Yeah, those two are hard for me to distinguish sometimes.
Now Nibali only a few wheels back. Valverde is still there as well.
And you know, you might have to think that Alejandro Valverde thinks that he may have a shot at a time bonus here today. He's not a field sprinter, but he's fast, and this is a reduced group, so he might be a guy trying to get a few seconds in a time bonus. Remember, 10, 6, and 4. The question is, will he have the speed against the faster sprinters?
I've got to be thinking Boassenhagen, Farah, also Ricchese from the sprinters we've seen in this group, now with 2 kilometers left to go. Edvald Boassenhagen was second in an uphill sprint earlier in the Vuelta, losing out to Philippe Gilbert, who's no longer in the race.
Yeah, Boassenhagen's a good bet.
Espana once again coming to the front here.
Wow, 1:15 now to the chasing group, so they're losing big time.
Looks like Nicholas Roach is definitely going to move up into the top 5 in the overall. 1.5 kilometers away. All flat into the finish. All right, so who wants to sprint? And more pressing is who wants to lead it out? Nobody.
That's Boassenhagen, I think, going off on his own. Really? No, that's not him as he looked back.
He's more, I think, towards the middle of the screen now, about 5th wheel.
I thought it was his figure until I saw the face when he looked back.
Tyler Farah is up there, moving towards the top of the screen as well. He's about 7, 8 wheels from the front. 1K to go banner, just over a half mile to the finish. Wide, flat, tailor-made for a sprint, but we have a reduced field of sprinters that are going to come to the line here. Who's going to lead it out? Who's going to have the speed? After over 4.5 hours of stage 17, looking around at the front, now a Belkin rider launches a move. Belkin at the very front here. They've lost a lot of riders along the way. 5 riders have pulled out for them.
And if you want to launch early, this is the time to do it because we don't have big lead-out trains. He got a good gap. Now the question is, can he hold on to it?
Wagner, Tanner, and Mollema, the only 3 Belkin riders left in the race for that
American teammate.
Down to the final few hundred meters of stage 17. Can Farah catch him? Or did he time this move perfectly? Now Bossenhagen and Rakese attacking in second and third position. Farah coming up as well, but they went too late. Belkin wins the stage. The sprinters missed out.
Sprinters denied, and that's the way to do it. It's Bakamolama who gets the win. That's what he's been wanting to do after his general classification ambitions were dashed in the mountains.
Mollema with a well-timed move. And now this next group featuring Thibaut Pinot and also Pozzovivo coming in behind them. But how much time have they lost? It was over a minute at one point.
It's going to be over a minute and a half at this point, I think. And you can see Thibaut Pinot's FDJ team on the front trying to minimize it, but Mollema gets it. That's got to feel good. This team has just been really beat up over the first 2.5 weeks of this bike race.
Now really the only way Mollema could win, he used the strategy that he had to. Created a little gap there in the final kilometer, and with the sprinters looking around at one another, no one reacting right away, he was able to maintain that margin to the finish for the stage win. And look at how much time Pinot, Pozzovivo, and these others have lost.
Well, the problem was none of the sprinters had many guys to help them chase them down.
A minute and a half lost by that second group on the road. Man whose move did wind up sticking, Buck Mollema.
Mollema figured it out just right. He said, you know what? There are some fast guys in this group, but they don't have a lot of teammates to chase and keep it fast into the final K. I'm going to go early and see if I can hold them off. The wind was out of the rider's right, so he was right up against the crowd, getting a little shelter from that wind. Johan van Sumeren tried to close it down for Tyler Farah, his teammate, and it just didn't work.
Even though it's only his second win, now 12 top 10s this season, was riding well at the Tour de France before falling ill in the final week, and confirmation of his season coming today late in week 3 of the Vuelta a Espana. And for today's stage number 18, the race heading due north over those 5 categorized climbs. And the race at the moment headed towards the last 2, but it has been a bumpy ride so far.
A lot of bumps for the guys, 116 miles in length. They've got 3 of the climbs in the rearview mirror approaching the Category 2 and then the Category 1 Peña Cabarga. 20% maximum grade, Steve, and the fireworks will be hot.
And we now pick up the action live. This is the front of the main field, and they are led by Movistar, the team in the dark blue with the green trim, chasing a large breakaway of 15 riders up the road who had a lead of 10 minutes at one point. It's come down to right around 6 minutes at this point in the race. What's at stake today? Well, we've already talked about just how pivotal this stage could be in the overall, and I think it really comes down to, does Nibali have the legs to stay with Horner, who has proven to be the best climber in the race?
Steve, he knows who he has to watch. The steeper the climb, obviously the slower the speed, so there's less draft. And so Horner has to capitalize on the steep slopes of the Peña Cabarga.
You just saw the names of some of the riders in this breakaway here today. No one, as you would anticipate, is a threat to the overall general classification. That's why the break was allowed to go up the road and get 10 minutes at one point. And now they are within the final 50K left to go on this stage. That's just over 186 kilometers in length. And just 2 categorized climbs left from the 5 that they started with before the stage ends in the Cantabria region near the Bay of Santander. And Movistar leading the way because Alejandro Valverde, the former Vuelta winner from 2009, sits 3rd in the general classification at 1:14 behind Nibali. He has not won a stage, and he would like time bonuses. And in order to get into the time bonus situation, you got to bring the breakaway back. There's still an intermediate sprint with just inside of 11K to go where there's bonus time, but the big time comes at the finish where there's 10, 6, and 4 seconds for the top three, so no surprise to see Movistar at the front, and would also not be a surprise to see Katusha lending a hand for Joaquim Rodriguez, who's one spot behind Valverde, 4th place in the GC.
Yeah, both of those men, Steve, very well suited for the finale, as the Peña Cabarga, in only 3.7 miles, climbs almost 1,800 vertical feet. It is a brutally steep climb, although it is not very long. It always causes separation.
And now the gap just about sliced in half to the breakaway from its largest margin, dipping down under 5 minutes.
As they start this there in the orange for Euskaltel, trying to get other guys to rotate through, Steve. He was the man who marked Diego Ulissi yesterday in a very late race attack, but they got nowhere.
Just starting this Category 2 climb that will summit just under 40 kilometers from the finish. And today is a stage where the breakaway could stay away to win the stage, and they certainly have enough riders to have the horsepower. Not everybody from this group will make it to the line, and for Vincenzo Nibali, the overall race leader, that's just the way he'd prefer it, for the break to stay up the road and eat up the time bonuses so his team doesn't have to work to try and contain Horner, Valverde, and Rodriguez, who would now no doubt be going for those bonuses if the break comes back.
And things starting to heat up in that breakaway a little bit as it starts to blow up.
Red line where the race is right now. Our leaders just starting the Cat 2. 3 Category 3 climbs already in the bank. So you have the Cat 2 climb, a sprint, and the Category 1 summit finish still to go. Now Vincenzo Nibali. Now his 12th consecutive day in the red jersey, and looking to his teammates to help support him today on what will be a pivotal day in the general classification battle. He has pretty good climbers, though, in the likes of Tanel Kengert, Yanni Brajkovic, Jakob Fuglsang, and also Paulo Tiralongo at his side to try and preserve his red jersey. Chris Horner, who is in 2nd place at just 28 seconds down, he's lost a man, as Fabian Cancellara has pulled out of the race to focus on the upcoming World Championships. So that's a blow for Horner. He still has a decent team around him, but Cancellara has been so good in the hills at the Vuelta. We'll see how that impacts Chris's chances.
It's definitely not a great situation for Chris. There's no doubt that having the loss of Cancellara can make a difference, especially today before the final climb and tomorrow's stage, which isn't as severe. I mean, oh, and look at Hayedo. This is the younger brother of JJ Hayedo, Lucas Sebastian Hayedo. That looks pretty nasty.
So obviously he went down at some point.
And he's looking for that. I don't know if he's looking for the team car or the medical car. I would say he's looking for the team car, because the medical car is right up behind the peloton. Looks like he's having some trouble holding on to the handlebars.
And we just mentioned Cancellara and the fact that he has pulled out of the race to set his sights on the World Championships. Jussi Vaikkonen has also abandoned for FDJ. So that's where we stand right now. This is the main field of the top overall contenders, just inside of 5 minutes back of a 15-man breakaway and under 50K left. The main field continues to be led by Movistar. They are in pursuit of the breakaway, and this one man at the front of the stage right now, Kirienka, the Belarusian, 32 years of age for Team Sky, a team that at the Tour de France had Chris Froome dominate the race from start to finish, won the yellow jersey. Team Sky has now won the Tour de France in back-to-back years, but at the Vuelta, they've struggled this year. Their 2 top general classification riders have not performed, Sergio Henao and Rigoberto Urán. Urán came close to a stage win a few days ago before being out-sprinted at the line by the Frenchman Warren Barguil. So Team Sky looking for some measure of redemption to salvage the Vuelta here in the final few days, and no surprise to see a rider like Kirienka out front on a stage like this.
Kirienka is a beast of a domestique. He's a total diesel, and we see him doing massive turns on the front quite often for the team leaders. But once in a while, he gets into a breakaway and he gets a chance to use some of his strength for his own results. One of those times was back in the 2011 Giro when he won stage number 20 with a 40-kilometer solo out of a large breakaway, much like today, over 2 giant mountain finishes. So do not count him out of being to hold this all the way to the line, but this is still a long way from the finish, and the field is charging hard.
And not only Iran and A now, but Edvald Boassenhagen also just missing out in the sprints. He was second to Philippe Gilbert on a stage that he looked like he was going to win. Just missed out yesterday when Bok Mollema surprised everyone with a late attack inside the final kilometers. Team Sky has been there. They've been in position. They've been around, but just haven't been able to come through with the big victory in any fashion here at the Vuelta so far. 30 kilometers left to go on a very pivotal stage 18 at the Vuelta a Espana, presented by Your Buds. Never hurt, never fall out, never stop. Live coverage here on Universal Sports today and through the remainder of this final weekend, featuring 3 consecutive summit finishes today, tomorrow, and on stage 20 Saturday up the Langrelou. Twitter questions throughout the race. The most recent one asking if the riders have new bikes every year, and if so, what happens to their old ones? Do they take them with them when they change? Now, that sounds like someone who's looking to buy a bike on eBay, or perhaps get one, maybe a little swag or something like that, kind of coming in the back door.
You can't believe how many bikes these guys have. Everybody in this race is going to have at least 3 bikes for some of the smaller teams. Some of the guys in this race may have 5 or 6 bikes between their time trial bikes and their road bikes. So typically what happens is the team will give them one bike at the end of the year, and that will become their training bike over the winter. But they'll actually sell the remaining bikes, and they do that via eBay and other methods. So if you keep your eyes out late in the season after things are all done and dusted for the year, there are a lot of really high-end bikes out there getting sold.
But the best place is to go to GoGo Cycle Center for the 50% off end of season sale every fall.
I'm telling you, man, we blow them out. We blow them out big time.
Well, if you want to tweet GoGo through the remainder of the Vuelta, you can do it at ViCiGoGo, hashtag La Vuelta. And perhaps get your question or comment on the air as Vasil Kirienka plows forward, now extending his lead out to 6.5 minutes with under 30K left. 4 climbs down, 1 to go. And before that, an intermediate sprint with just under 11K remaining in the stage.
Well, Kirienka may be a Belarusian, but he actually lives in Spain, and he's spent a lot of his career training and racing not only around the world, but in the Spanish area. And he's a guy who you can see with his gap now at 6:28 over the peloton, you can see why he's such a hotly, well, a sought-after domestique, because when he's not doing the domestique work and he's off the front, he can hold off a lot of good riders.
So at this point, he has a lead of 6.5 minutes over the top GC riders who are in the peloton. There are other riders between Kirienka and the main field who were part of the original 15-man breakaway. We have just about 29 kilometers left to go. 1 more climb. What are the chances of someone from the breakaway winning the stage at this point?
I think they're fairly good, Steve. I think that the peloton is going to continue to charge really hard. But, you know, with Kirienka having a ride like he is, and then as we last saw was Martinez, Vicioso, and Chris Anker Sorensen in the chasing group of 3 behind him, I think there's a really good shot that one or all of those guys may stay away from this group here in front of us.
That is not preventing Alejandro Valverde's Movistar team from continuing to chase at the front of the main field to try and bring the breakaway back, but they're not gaining time, they're losing time at this point.
It's really impressive to see what Kirienka is doing out on the road. And yeah, you know, Valverde would like to have a shot at a stage win, because he hasn't won one, and it gives him a 10-second time bonus. But it doesn't really change the tactic that much at this point. He wants to make this race as hard as possible and then try and launch on the Peña Cabarga. And, you know, if you don't have a chance to win the stage, well, you can still get a time gap, and everything counts at this point in the bike race.
As far as time bonuses, this actually plays into Chris Horner's favor, because without Fabian Cancellara, his team is compromised somewhat. Typically, they would have to do the chasing to bring the breakaway back to get him in a position to get a time bonus by finishing in the top 3 to inch closer to Nibali. But with his Radio Shack squad not at full strength, Movistar, with their ambitions of moving Valverde up, they do the chasing. Chris Horner doesn't have to use his team, but yet he still benefits from the work of Movistar here at the front.
And isn't it so interesting how the tactics change from day to day? And it's possible that if Cancellara were in this race, we would be seeing the Radio Shack men on the front. And they'd have to be doing a lot of work. But basically, you know, if there's a discussion in the peloton between Valverde and Horner, he says, look, you know what, we don't have Fabian anymore. I can't put my guys on the front and use them up. And so then Valverde says, all right, we're going to do it instead.
Up and down all the way to the finish, and only up when they get down inside the final 6 kilometers to the Peña Cabarga. Movistar still rolling through at a pretty good clip for the 33-year-old who spent over a dozen years as a professional, won this Vuelta back in 2009, runner-up last year, and now today in third place as the day started, a minute 14 behind the leader Vincenzo Nibali, looking for his first stage win. Would love a time bonus that's looking less likely at this point, and also looking to potentially still move into the red jersey. It's a long shot at this point, I got to believe, for Valverde, but if nothing else, he would like to remain on the podium.
Yeah, Valverde is a guy with high ambitions. There's no doubt about it. And he got, well, let's just say, bad luck at the wrong time, spit out the back in the Tour de France with some mechanical issues and a crosswind, and lost a bunch of time. Still finished in the top 10 and said, all right, I'm going home to Spain, and I'm going to try and win my home Grand Tour. And so far, on the really tough mountain days, he's been coming up a little bit short, but he seems to be getting better, and he seems to be getting more motivated as well. And you put those two things together, better legs and a better head, he could be a really potent guy, especially on a day like today.
He's going to need the motivation to bring back this man who is as equally motivated, if not more so. Vasil Kirienka from the breakaway, now the solo leader. 6-man group right here, the second on the road behind our singular leader, Vasil Kirienka of Team Sky, with about a dozen kilometers left to go. So just about half a dozen until the start of the final and potentially decisive climb up the Category 1 Peña Cabarga. Using it in the Vuelta for the 4th different time in history and the 3rd time in the last 4 years. As Kirienka hits the 10K to go banner right now. They used it for the first time back in 1979, and then they didn't revisit it until 2010 when Joaquim Rodriguez won the stage. Vincenzo Nibali rode into the red jersey on that day because Igor Anton of the Euskaltel team crashed prior to getting to the Peña Cabarga climb. He was wearing the overall leader's jersey, but crashed out of the race before the climb even started. So Nibali moved into red when J-Rod won in 2010 on the climb. Then they also used it in 2011, and that was the year that Chris Froome beat J.J. Koba. Now, here in 2013, what will happen? All of the top GC riders are back in the field 6 minutes behind Kirienka.
You know what I don't understand is why it took him 36 years to bring the climb back. It's an awesome finishing climb. It always has incredibly dynamic racing. It's just, it baffles me. I don't know why they left it out for 36 years. It's so nice to see it back again this year for the 3rd time in 4 years.
So the GC-led peloton has taken about a half minute out of Kirienka, but you still feel this is too much time for them to bring back with 9.5K to go, right?
I do, yeah. I may be proven wrong, but I do believe that it's too much time. And, you know, if Kirienka doesn't get enough calories in and he totally explodes on the climb, well, yeah, he could definitely lose that much time. But there's all those guys just behind him about a minute. You would think that at least one of these group, okay, they're 1:30 back. You would expect at least one of these guys with 4.5 minutes to hold off the peloton.
Movistar has been leading the peloton since we've come on the air, riding at a pretty good tempo. Is that in any way a mistake in your mind?
No, I don't think it is. Honestly, they want to make the race as hard as possible, and their primary goal is to get time on Vincenzo Nibali and Chris Horner. So the harder they make it, the more those guys get isolated. We've seen that Vincenzo has had a couple of days in the mountains where he has not been scintillating. And so if that's the case, the harder you make it till the climb, the bigger the chance is, if Valverde's feeling good, that he can get something. The chances of him getting time on both Horner and Nibali, well, that's a lot to ask for, but it's a type of climb that suits him very well.
Vincenzo Nibali obviously knows the climb and can do well on the steep ascents, so he's not worried about what they're about to face. Chris Horner said this morning at the start he's never raced up the Peña Cabarga, but his teammates have talked to him about it. They've described what he's in for. He said, on second thought, maybe I've done it in training, I'm not sure. He's been based in the Santander area of northern Spain for, well, he was based there back in the mid-2000s for a short time, so he thinks that maybe he rode it at some point, but the bottom line is he doesn't remember the climb.
Yeah, and when I talked with him coming into the Vuelta at great length, and we talked about all sorts of topics, and one of the things I asked him, Steve, was how much have you reconnoitered all these climbs? How much do you have familiarity? And he said, well, a lot of the stuff, I don't know if I've ridden it, just like he mentioned after the race yesterday and before the race today. But one of the things that I posed to him is, if you don't know a climb and it's really hard, typically the first time you do it, it feels harder than it does the second and third time once you have that familiarity. And so we talked about that a bit, and he said, well, it does make a difference a little bit. Like if you're just barely hanging on a wheel and you know the climb, you might be able to force yourself to hang on that little bit longer. Or if you're going for the stage win, it might help you just that teeny bit. But the difference between getting dropped and losing a minute or not, that's not going to be a difference.
Okay, the red jersey is up for grabs here at the end of stage 18 on a very difficult final climb, the Peña Cabarga. They're just a few moments away from starting that ascent. Buckle up, because this one could be good.
It's an incredible ride for the Belarusian. Steve, he was, and I'm looking here to just, that's Chris Anker Sorensen. Just making sure we still had our time gaps correct. He was third at the World Championship time trial last year, Kirienka. So you add that to the rest of his diesel style, and he is a good man to hold on. But look at this battle for position in the peloton.
The head of the main field as Radio Shack has now come to the front, riding for Chris Horner in the white jersey. Katusha also up there in the red and white for Joaquim Rodriguez. Again, over 5 minutes down. They've taken a lot of time back as the pace is picked up, because everybody wants to be near the front when the final climb starts for this group.
And look at Radio Shack on the front. Chris Horner sitting fourth wheel. He's got his boys whipped into a frenzy right now.
Now the Espana squad of overall leader Vincenzo Nibali, several places back as they go under the 7K to go banner, so still a kilometer away from starting the climb.
And literally, those teammates of Chris Horner's are riding like the finish line is about 300 meters into the base of the climb. They will go flat out to try and keep him in position.
Without Fabian Cancellara, who again pulled out before the start of today's stage to concentrate on the World Championships. Kirienka concentrating on a possible stage win, 4.5 kilometers away at this point.
And look at the gap has come down from 6.5 minutes to 5:13 as the peloton. Now this is Popovic on the front.
Now Radio Shack at the front for the first time today. Movistar, the team of Alejandro Valverde, had been doing all the work. Radio Shack a bit weakened with the loss of Cancellara, taking up the pacemaking. Still have not seen Espana at the front. They're trying to rest to preserve their energy to keep Vincenzo Nibali up front all the way up this final climb. And now they're starting the climb, making that left-hand turn. The top general classification riders are on the Peña Cabarga.
Fasten your seatbelt, because you're going to need to hold on tight right now, as we already have an attack coming up the right side of the peloton. And it looks like a Radio Shack man.
It does indeed, and Robert Kieserlowski is second there. Another Radio Shack rider. Chris Horner, fourth wheel in the white jersey.
Paulo Tirolongo up there for Astana in the light blue colors.
This is the back of that peloton, and things come apart very quickly when a final climb like this starts. This is our leader, Vasil Kirienka, headed towards the 4K to go banner.
Kirienka's got to be hoping that he got plenty of calories into his system in between the climbs, because he's going to need them right now. And look at that gap just plummeting to him. But he still has a pretty big margin and cushion to work with. So if he just stays on top of that gear and doesn't blow himself out, he could easily hold on for the win.
Kirienka attacked from the breakaway and went on the solo move over 40 kilometers from the finish. He's still away with under 4K left.
And Matthew Boucher on the front right now. Then it's Kieserlowski, also for Radio Shack, out of the saddle. Horner in third. Then it's Rodriguez on his wheel. Boy, Chris Horner looked so good yesterday in the crosswind, Steve, and he is carrying that ambition with him today.
Vincenzo Nibali just behind the Katusha riders. He is 3 wheels removed from Horner at the frontier. Remember, on the top of the general classification, Nibali started the day leading Horner by 28 seconds, Valverde by 1:14. He holds a 2:29 advantage on Joaquim Rodriguez, who is in 4th. 10% here, as Chris Horner still has 2 teammates pacing him at the start of the climb.
And things already thinning out quite a bit at the back of the peloton, and it's got a long way to go as it thins out up to the top.
Well, still at this point on the early slopes with 5K to go, our general classification riders sitting outside of the time bonus positions with other riders up the road.
Well, now Movistar's come to chip in to make the pace hard as Boucher, the American, pulls off the front for Radio Shack.
And now Horner just left with Kieserlowski to help him. Kirienka the leader. That 4:21 gap is back to this group here. Horner has been the best climber at the Vuelta. Nobody has dropped him, but the key now is, can he drop Nibali like he did on Monday and gain back time? As Nibali recovered through the rest day, through yesterday's flat finish, he likes the steep finishes like we have today. It suits his style, but how much has fatigue set in over these 3 weeks? Nibali won the Giro, set out the Tour de France, trying to build back up. Chris Horner, certainly fresh, having not raced much this year, missing the Tour, didn't race the Giro because of the knee injury. They've got to show their form, their fitness, and all of their skills here today. The first of 3 straight uphill finishes headed towards the final weekend of the season's final Grand Tour.
Steve, they're absolutely flying. It's about a 9 to 10% grade where they are, and they're riding at about 12 miles an hour, which is incredibly fast. Kirienka just suffering trying to hold on to this as the time gap continues to lessen with every pedal stroke from the field, which is really heating up the battle.
12% here. Where Kirienka is, he's about to hit the only relatively gentle part of the climb where it backs off for a short while to inside of 2% and then immediately kicks right back up to over 10. At the halfway point, it levels off somewhat and then goes almost vertical in the final couple of kilometers.
Mikel Nieve for Euskaltel just popping off the back. Thibaut Pinot in the blue for FDJ, number 101, hanging on to the back as well. But the action from the peloton, these are the GC men. Horner in third, white jersey out of the saddle. Nibali out of the saddle in the red jersey right on his wheel. the green jersey of the sprint leader, Valverde, is there, and Rodriguez also for Katusha. All those men locked in battle.
Nibali right on Horner's wheel.
Well, he knows where he needs to be. He has been following that man in the mountains on so many of the summit finishes, and the days he has lost track of that wheel, he has lost time.
And it's Thibaut Pinot, number 101, back in that group. This is our leader, Kirienka, over halfway up the climb. Has a 4-minute lead on the group containing the general classification riders right here that's starting to thin out. At the very front, that is Jose Herrera, number 5 in the dark colors for Movistar. Behind him, Robert Kieserlowski, the teammate of Chris Horner for Radio Shack. And then in the red jersey right in the middle there behind Horner, that's the leader, Vincenzo Nibali.
And look at Kieserlowski there. He just popped. He'd been riding on Herrera's wheel, waiting to try and open things up for Chris Horner. But now he's already back to the back of this group, Steve, as Kieserlowski has gone from the front all the way to the back in just a few seconds. That's what happens on these brutally steep climbs.
So Horner now isolated. Now on the right-hand side of the screen, that is the climb, the steep gradients, that spot where it levels off in the middle and then kicks back up. Then hits 20% and beyond in the final kilometers. So given that, it's so steep, so late. We saw the highlight of what happened in that kilometer and how much it changed in 2011. Given all that, will these riders here wait until that final K to make a move?
Well, it's where it's steepest, and that's when you know that you have a shot to go all the way to the line. Kirienka with 2K to go to the line. That's 1.2 miles. He's got to feel pretty darn good about himself today.
That second chase group that grew to 8 riders at one point has just not been able to bring him back. Attacking from outside of 40K from the finish. Went over the summit of the Category 2 by himself, now going up the Cat 1 also on his own.
It's so similar to his Giro d'Italia stage win in 2011 into Sestriere, where he did about 40 kilometers off the front of a big breakaway group over 2 huge mountains and held on for the win. Kirienka has not won any races this year or last year, although he was 3rd at the World Championships in the individual time trial last year.
All right, back in this group, Valverde has moved in front of Horner. This is now back to the very front of the race. Kirienka, 15% and growing. Has still not hit the maximum gradient of 20% that comes inside the final kilometer, but he's getting there shortly. Saxo Tinkoff again riding for Nicholas Roach, who yesterday rode back into the top 5, passing Pozzovivo on a crosswind stage, where it split up the field into several different groups on the road.
Well, Roach is there. We're about 8 guys back. Number 205 for Saxo Tinkoff in the blue and yellow. So he is still looking pretty good. Kieserlowski at the back of this group out of the saddle, suffering but still hanging on, and they'll hang on as long as they can so that they can try and help their team leader out. So if Kieserlowski can recover it all, he'll help out Horner. Oh, man. I mean, literally, he just looks drawn as he tries to slog up this climb, but he does still have good leg speed. A lot of guys on these super steep climbs, they'll run a different crank set with a smaller chainring known as a compact crank, and that way they can stay on top of the gear on these brutally steep slopes.
Approaching the final kilometer. Vasil Kirienka trying to deliver Team Sky an elusive bright spot in this Vuelta a Espana. Back here at the head of the reduced main field of top general classification contenders. Nicholas Roach, Alejandro Valverde, Chris Horner, Vincenzo Nibali, Joaquim Rodriguez. They're 3.5 minutes back.
Roach really riding incredibly well. He's got Majka on the front for him. Maybe he's got some designs on something special here today, but I don't think it's the perfect day for Roach, honestly.
1 kilometer to go for Kirienka, and over 20% coming up shortly. Here it goes, inching closer to that 20% mark now. And behind, a much faster clip. Saxo Tinkoff at the front. Nicholas Roach, their top GC rider, sitting 5th overall, still waiting for the first attack from that group. Other riders from the breakaway coming back. That's Greg Bollé of Vacon Soleil from the early move, as Katusha comes to the front of the contingent now.
That's the 1-2. Danny Moreno and Joaquim Rodriguez. This is how they start hitting them hard.
All right, the first accelerations have been made from the top contenders.
They've even brought a third man to the front at this point as they're ripping up these steep slopes.
Daniel Moreno, winner of 2 stages, the only Spaniard to win a stage at the Vuelta so far this year.
Look at that. Nibali is in trouble, and Horner goes by.
Horner trying to open up a gap on Nibali. Valverde behind the race leader right now in the green jersey.
All right, this is it. The chips are down. Everything's on the table.
Oh, Chris Horner really digging deep to try to distance Nibali. Joaquim Rodriguez up here trying to move past Valverde into the top 3.
Kirienka just flogging himself to hold on for a huge win.
And now they're coming apart in the general classification group behind him on the road.
Well, Nibali is gapped off. Valverde is really gapped off.
Could Valverde be losing his podium spot right now? Starting the day 1:14 down on Nibali. And here's Nibali just behind Horner. Chris Horner still looking good here.
All right, this is that flatter section now, so Nibali has made it back up to the wheel to Horner.
And Joaquim Rodriguez right behind Nibali with the unzipped jersey in the red and white for Katusha. So Rodriguez, a chance to make up time on Valverde, who's been dropped. But our leader at the front, Kirienka, riding into a stage win.
Well, they have the cars closer to the breakaway this year, and that forces the people to stay out of the road.
Now here's Horner in the white jersey ahead of Nibali, further back down the slope with Perito on Nibali's wheel. Valverde losing time, but trying to claw back.
And Horner's just going to keep that pressure on. This is his only option at this point. He's got to just grind Nibali off. There's not much draft on a climb that's this steep.
And it will get steeper. Let's see where Valverde is. Bottom of the screen in that green jersey.
And guys just falling apart from that early breakaway. That's Simon Clark for Orica, just coming backwards. Van Rensburg also, as Horner's going to go right by him with Nibali glued to his wheel.
Kirienka approaching the finish. Now Horner putting a gap into Nibali here.
Oh, this is huge. This is what he needs. The steeper, the better for Horner.
The 32-year-old Belarusian from Team Sky, Vasil Kirienka, wins stage number 18. And Chris Horner going for the red jersey now. He's dropping Nibali.
And Nibali looked like he was completely cracked, pedaling squares.
Kirienka enjoys one of the finest moments of his career, winning on the Peña Cabarga. Now the GC battle behind. Chris Horner opening up that margin on Nibali. Other guys from the breakaway coming backwards. Chris Horner passing Amit Charuka here. Hard to tell where the other riders from the early break are, if there are still time bonus slots available. Second and third, 6 and 4 seconds apiece. And Horner, the best climber in this race, potentially riding into red if he can keep up this acceleration, and Nibali falters like he is here.
And look at Vincenzo just dropping the head time and time again. He's a fighter. He's trying to hold on, but he does not have the legs. And he sat on Chris for a long time, and then he just detonated. And Horner is really putting some time into him now. He could be riding into the red jersey.
This is a massive surge by the American Chris Horner. Under 2 months away from his 42nd birthday.
And don't expect him to sit down. He will ride out of the saddle, maybe all the way to the finish. That's how he develops the power on the climb. A sterling performance by the American.
Started the day 28 seconds behind Nibali in second place on the general classification. Chris Horner with 2 stage wins already in the Vuelta. He's worn the red leader's jersey and now crossing the line. And we'll wait to see where the current red jersey of Nibali comes in, because Horner could be the new leader by the end of the day. If nothing else, he's moved closer as Valverde now goes by Nibali. Joaquin Rodriguez just ahead of Valverde here, coming up behind Horner. So Rodriguez finishes, then Valverde. Now here comes Nibali. Nicholas Roach on his wheel as Nibali crosses the line.
It's going to be really close there. It's going to be really, really close. I don't know.
Right around 26 seconds that it looked like Horner put into Nibali. That is unofficial.
And we don't know if he got a time bonus, so we don't know that either.
Hang on. We'll sort it out when we come back. So Nibali leading Chris Horner by 3 seconds. Alejandro Valverde had trouble today, brought it back late, still over a minute down. This is all about Nibali and Horner going into the final weekend. For Joaquin Rodriguez, it's about trying to get on the podium, and he's battling the man in green in order to try and do that. But the shark, Vincenzo Nibali, hanging on to the red jersey by a thread at this point. Chris Horner breathing down his neck. What can this man do?